Hi, welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the original podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner. I'm a critic, consultant, and programmer based in Toronto, and this is the other thing I do. My guest this week is Elliott Hasler, a writer and director who finished his first film, World War II: The Long Road Home, at the age of 16. His follow-up, Vindication Swim, stars Kristen Callahan in the true story of Mercedes Gletze, who in 1927 set out to become the first British woman to swim the English Channel. It's opening in select US theaters this Friday, October 17th, and should be arriving on Canadian screens later this fall. Elliott picked Pirates of the Caribbean: The Curse of the Black Pearl, the 2003 blockbuster that turned a creaky old theme park ride into a billion-dollar film franchise, revitalized Johnny Depp's career, minted Keira Knightley and Orlando Bloom as romantic heroes, and probably should have won Geoffrey Rush an Oscar for Best Supporting Actor. It also would not have happened, not at all, without director Gore Verbinski, who gives the supernatural seafaring adventure a fantastical, lighthearted vibe that every subsequent installment of the series has tried to recapture, including the ones directed by Gore Verbinski. And The Curse of the Black Pearl was also, arguably, the most important film Elliott Hasler ever saw. He'll explain. This is Someone Else's Movie.
I mean, I sort of the film that got me into filmmaking, really. I grew up with that film. It was one of the first films I ever watched, actually. It sort of came out, 2003 it released. So I was about 3 years old. I didn't catch it in theaters, obviously I was too young. So about a year later when it came out on DVD. And yeah, I mean, I've watched it probably about 1,000 times, over and over again. It was my favorite film growing up. And it's, sort of led me into filmmaking, really. That was the one that really kind of inspired me and ignited my passion for cinema.
Did I get that right? You were 4? You've been watching this ever since childhood? Because I'm sure there are movies that I've seen in the same way and just absorbed, although I didn't have access to a VCR or DVD player when I was a kid. So yeah, that's fascinating. The idea of a formative experience that just sort of stays with you from that young.
Yeah. So whenever the DVD first came out of Curse of the Black Pearl, that was, I would have been about 4 years old, I think. Yeah. I was born in 2000. So yeah.
Did you get to any of the sequels? I mean, the first two in the theater?
The first two, and then I think they took a bit of a nosedive after that. So I kind of gave up with them. But that sort of initial trilogy, I was a huge fan of. Still am a huge fan of.
Yeah, it's such an interesting landmark in terms of what studios thought would be what people wanted and where like epic cinema had to go after Lord of the Rings. Can it be somewhat fantastic? Can it be an ensemble piece that really only focuses on a handful of people? Can we go bigger and bigger and bigger? And then just the place that it occupies in Gore Verbinski's filmography is truly fascinating to me as well, because I mean, I was in my 30s at the time and covering it as a film critic, and not a single person on the way into the press screening had any expectations of it. And well, we had this whole weird story where it was a platform projection, still on film at the time in 2003, and the platter screwed up. They had conformed the reel inappropriately, and so reel 2, I think it was the transition from 2 to 3, or even might have even been 1 to 2, was upside down and backwards, which means, and when that happened, you were screwed. The screening was over. Captain Jack Sparrow arriving on the dock and just stepping off his sinking boat. And it cut to something that was just garbled and gibberish and upside down. And this was 500 people in a theater, radio contest winners, that sort of thing. And they lost their minds. They were furious. Apologies were made, and the studio was handing out little, coupons. Or the theater chain was reimbursing people for another free screening. And then very quietly, the publicist for the film found the press and said, this is going to take a while to fix, but we could screen it again. We probably won't be able to screen it for you until midnight. And this would have been a Monday night screening. It was early enough that there was no rush to deadline. So they gave us the option of a midnight screening or rescreening the whole film the next day. And 7 or 8 people wanted to stay. They would have stayed till midnight. They were already into it 20 minutes in. One of the strangest experiences I've ever had. I came back the next morning because I didn't live close to the theater and it was a whole thing.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But yeah, the 20 minutes in, all of these people who were skeptical and grumpy and annoyed that there'd even be a movie made about this theme park attraction were on board. And I don't know that I've ever seen a pivot that fast among jaded film industry professionals. So what was it like to experience it as a kid?
Yeah, that's I can't really remember. I was sort of was sort of enthralled by the whole sort of mystery of it. I mean, they're just such fun movies. You know, you do sit in them and you are just immediately kind of engrossed in the world of it. But yeah, sort of looking back on it now, you know, I can completely get what you're saying about it. It's a film that would never have really been made. You know, it sounds terrible. You know, a theme park ride. It's sort of inspired movie about pirates, and pirate movies, you know, obviously notoriously have flopped up until that point. So yeah, I mean, it's incredible it ever got made. Really, you know, I'm very grateful it was. But you know, I just can't believe a studio ever greenlit it. Really.
Well, yeah, especially since there is no real story. They had to in the theme park ride. They had to invent all of this mythology from whole cloth, and the story of the script development is fascinating in itself. Stuart Beattie, who's an editor and became a director, was working on it with Jerry Bruckheimer and Disney, and no one. It seemed like no one had any sense of the tone, that it was just going to be every other pirate movie but bigger. And then Verbinski apparently was the one who came in and said, no, it should be scary. It should be creepy. It should be all the stuff that isn't in the ride. And maybe we hit a couple of beats that people recognize, like a scene where everyone is drinking or a scene where there's swashbuckling, but make sure there's a consistent through line. And given what he'd just done with The Ring for DreamWorks, where he took a really simple and almost no budget horror concept from the original film and turned it into this lush atmospheric thing, it makes perfect sense that would be his pitch. But it is also, you know, so strangely idiosyncratically odd. You have these performances are arguing with each other. There's a modern angle on what Keira Knightley and Orlando Bloom are doing, where, I mean, they've clearly also borrowed that from The Princess Bride, but in an almost more dynamic way, in that the Keira Knightley's character gets to be a swordswoman right from the beginning. She's always capable, and she's always the most rational person in any given room. But then she's plunged into this weird world of pirates and curses and ghosts and maniacs. And somehow there's a romantic through line that carries through. Like it is everything that you think you want from a pirate movie that no pirate movie had ever done before, which is why it was so refreshing to just realize, oh, they're going for it. They're actually just going to do everything.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. Yeah, it was you get Jeffrey Rush kind of doing the classic pirate kind of trope, but he makes it so fun and so sort of engaging as well. You know, he's a fantastic actor and it's a great character. And then obviously Johnny Depp kind of reinvents the whole notion of what a pirate is, and you know, prior to that, everyone Blackbeard was kind of like the pirate. You know, you mention a pirate and you kind of think of that, and today it's Jack Sparrow. He's totally reinvented, you know, what a pirate is and what it should be, which is an amazing thing for an actor to have done. Really, I mean, it's just totally changed kind of the culture around a whole era of history.
Yeah, and what Sparrow starts as in the first movie, and even in the second and third, I think, is the Renaissance Johnny Depp thing, where he had been in the weeds for a little while as an actor, and he'd finally come back with something like Secret Window, where people were seeing him as an interesting antic presence again. And I mean, we can talk about his subsequent devolution into, I wish I could remember who it was. Someone referred to him by the fourth Pirates movie as a sentient collection of scarves, which is just a beautiful way to encapsulate that character. But he was using Keith Richards as an element, and he was putting weird things in his beard and the cold in his eyes, making him look like a maniac raccoon. There's like a connection there to the stuff he was doing in Benny and June 10 years earlier, weirdly enough, where he was playing a Buster Keaton monkey, but also doing physical stuff that even Keaton wouldn't do. And the whole, I don't know how to put this, the Johnny Depp of it all, the way that the character became a kind of straitjacket for him in the next decade and was all people seemed to want, or all he wanted to do while he was off doing other things and doing interesting work while his personal life was falling apart. Again, it's all a mess. But in that first film, it's a mess that feels like I don't know, an unrepeatable event. It's lightning striking a performance in a character. And the comparison I've used subsequently was casting Robert Downey Jr. in Iron Man and realizing you don't even need to act. You have the entire persona of the actor fueling this version of the character. And here it's kind of the opposite. Jack Sparrow is a new creation, but and built on all of Johnny Depp's affectations and tics and everything else. But then subsequently, Sparrow sort of becomes his default personality, and that creates its own problems.
Yeah, that's an interesting way of thinking about it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if you're a kid, you're not really perceiving his history when you see him. It's like it's the way I was when I saw Superman. This Christopher Reeve guy, he just flew that way.
I mean, I'd never seen him before. Obviously, that was my introduction to him and to Orlando Bloom, Keira Knightley, Jeffrey. All the actors that are in the film. I'd never seen anything before. So I mean, it was an interesting introduction to him because obviously, he had such a so many films and such a fantastic kind of repertoire of work prior to that. So to be introduced to kind of what is his quintessential role, I suppose, is in a way is a bit of a shame because it would have been nice to have kind of seen his work before that without knowledge of Jack Sparrow. But obviously, he was Jack Sparrow right from the outset for me.
The idea that all of Johnny Depp's filmography is out there because of these mainstream big event like tentpole cinema pictures. Where do you go from there?
Yeah, it's certainly interesting. I'm a big fan of Oasis, and that was the same for me in that sense because I sort of began with them and then started looking at the stuff that inspired their music, and that got me into sort of the Beatles and the Stones and then all that kind of 60s stuff. So it really does kind of work like that. You start listening to the sort of modern stuff, and then it takes you back kind of, and you discover more about them. And then obviously from Johnny Depp, his inspirations prior to that as well, like you say, Buster Keaton, and obviously the Brando-esque kind of element of it and things. So it does introduce you to this whole sort of universe of movies that otherwise you wouldn't have probably sort of come across.
And to return to Pirates itself and the phenomenon that it became, something I don't think it's been given a lot of credit for is The Craft, where it is just meticulously created fantasy. Nothing in this movie is real. I mean, they built the ship and they built the sets, but it's an invented world that actually plays with our expectations of reality for a while. In the first film, it goes full fantasy by the second one, but in the first one, it's really quite subtle. There's no, bolts of lightning when the curse is lifted, or and the rules are left for us to figure out as we go. And you have this sense that we are Elizabeth. We never fully know what's going on, and we have both feet in, but we're not grounded to anything. And navigating the film, I guess when you're a kid, the rules are just the rules, right? It's whatever the world is doing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I do think even as a kid, I was appreciative of kind of the level and sort of care to the detail of the world that sort of went into that as well. Like everything does feel real because of the sort of, the care they took making it. Like you said, they built the ships, they clearly shot it out at sea as well, and everything in it, I think it just lends itself to that world. The costumes look real. You see a lot of kind of movies today, and it all kind of looks cheap, it looks fake, or you can clearly tell it's kind of CG and things like that. Which in this one, even though there is a lot of CGI, what is in there is very high quality because that's just what they're focusing on. They're not doing sort of creating the world of it through CGI, not filming on a ship set against a blue screen. They are actually out there in the Caribbean doing it for real, which I think as a kid it immerses you so much more into that world and really kind of it stands a test of time a lot better than other films, I think.
Oh, definitely. I mean, the tactility of it, as you say, is such a necessary point to start with, and the sequels kind of kept it going where they could, even as they got increasingly bizarre and outlandish, and you had giants and whirlpools and krakens and all those things. But I guess that's what it is. Like it's a 2-hour, 20-minute epic that feels very small because it's only on the one ship at any given time, right? I mean, it is a very small a very small collection of central characters who are in this big world, which is, I think, why Disney said, "Oh, it's a trilogy. We're going to do more. There's so many others. There's 7 Cs. We could make 7 movies." And they sort of petered out after 5. Then, as you say, they do get increased. I think that's just once you lose the through line of Will and Elizabeth, there's so little to hang it on. I mean, the fourth film very quickly proved that Jack Sparrow is not enough to carry the story. You need someone who is worthy of our investment in more than just a cartoonish level.
Well, he's not even really kind of the lead in the first sort of couple of films. I mean, he sort of is in the second one, but there's the first and the third. It's kind of the other characters are kind of driving the story in which he's sort of a part of, which I think works a lot better. Yeah, I mean, obviously as a as the only reason to go and see it. You need those kind of straight men in Orlando Bloom and obviously like Keira Knightley, those elements that are kind of take away from him. And then obviously he just kind of came like comic relief later on, whereas he was a much more useful character and more in a supporting role in the first film.
Yeah, I do think it's also sort of telling that they ended up bringing back almost the entire cast for the fifth one just because they realized that none of it was working. Like there just needs to be a connection to the original premise and storyline rather than, was it the fourth one that has a lengthy flashback to how Jack got his hat or his scarf or something? And it felt,
maybe I don't rewatch those two. I kind of stick to the original trilogy.
Yeah, no, I've seen them each once, and they have blurred into, and it's not necessarily fair to the filmmakers. I mean, people were doing the work, the effort was there, but there's just something. It's diminishing returns all the way. I mean, even 2 and 3 are less effective for being bigger, I think, and sillier in a way that the silliness, that's it. The silliness is contained in the first film in that Jack is there to frustrate people, steal stuff. He's basically a coyote. He shows up to just bother people, take things that aren't his and run around. And then once you start giving him history and depth, which is the one thing that character does not want, you're fighting against the tide. Basically, the tide wants to take him out and be silly, and the movie keeps insisting, no, we should feel for him. It's like the idea. I think it's there's a flirtation in the first film, but he's very annoying in a Pepe Le Pew kind of way. That he's flirting with Elizabeth because she's the only woman for 50 nautical miles.
Yeah, and
then that they just kept doing that and almost pretended that the third film had a love triangle between her and Will and Sparrow's. No, come on, it's gross. Don't do that. It's unnecessary. And I honestly think that the most interesting thing about Jack is that he is beyond such things. Like he can't. The only thing he loves is the boat.
Well, I never thought it was something that needed to be explained. Because sort of the mystery of it is what makes the character. He's wearing it in his hair and he's got it tied to his belt. All that kind of thing. Yeah. As you say, kind of, it doesn't need the sort of the level of exposition that it subsequently kind of went into.
Yeah, but that's always what happens when people start spinning, I think, in story meetings or in development, where it's just like, we have to give people the thing they think they want. And I'm enjoying Alien Earth right now, I will admit. But other than that, there aren't a lot of prequels that have really engaged me because they just feel like they're inevitabilities. We're going to end up where we always had to get to. And the people who were around will be around in the movie that you like. And here's some of them, played by younger people or maybe the same people, but it's ultimately not going to develop or push anything. We'll just understand one relationship a little better because of a little secret.
Yeah, very true. Yeah. So it's interesting kind of way of thinking about it. I think with all of these things, it becomes sort of it loses the artistry and becomes kind of a money making, a money printing, they hope, machine, after a while. But, I mean, that was really what kind of set the first one apart. It was a film that shouldn't have been successful, which should never have really happened. Yeah. I think with the care and the kind of the detail that people put into it, they were all clearly very passionate about that film, and it really does show. It translates so well on screen. Yeah, I have yet to be able to interview Verbinski about it. I would love to talk to him someday and just find out how that first pitch went. This is my vision for your theme park attraction. I want you to give me $100 million to make this movie. And whatever it was convincing enough that Disney let him go for it. And then subsequently, that's the other thing too. Like, everything has to be a franchise. Everything has to be an epic. The third film is 3 hours long because that's the story it demands. And honestly, I think the simplicity of the first film demonstrates that you don't need to have connected adventures. You don't need to have recurring characters. Even like the same villains don't have to keep returning. You killed Barbossa, let him stay dead. He's more interesting for a one and done. Although I do think his return in the end of the second movie was a great ending. When he walks down the stairs and bites into the apple, and they just left it on that cliffhanger. I do think that was a great moment. That was fun. But also, you knew the second film would be around in a year, so you didn't have to kill yourself to go see it. That's true. Yeah. Yeah, and that is, I guess, that's something that that's definitely something that Peter Jackson gave them, right? The sense of a 3-movie, 3-year structure where you are guaranteed that there will be the follow-up, you will get the ending, you will get the answers. We're just playing at length. And
kicked off this entire wave. Like the two Matrix sequels were released that way, 6 months apart. The two Pirates movies were a year apart, I think. And it was okay. It was actually fun to know that you weren't going to get all the answers, but it comes to a good ending in the second film, at the very least, with Jack gone and Barbossa back, and the sense that we're going to have to deal with this upended dynamic for the rest of it. But the foolishness, the lightness goes away, I think, after the first film, because they're always setting the pieces in place for the next thing. And in the original Black Pearl, you just have the fun.
Yeah, I guess they never, would have anticipated that it was going to spawn into kind of a sequel or franchise, at that point. If the film even made money, I guess in their view, it would have been a success at that point. But I don't think anyone kind of anticipated that roller coaster of a, successful franchise that it was going to become.
Hey, it's Norm, interrupting my own show to bring you up to speed on Shiny Things, my newsletter about physical media, culture, and the odd streaming project. Last week, I reviewed Warner's 4K box set of the original Nightmare on Elm Street movies and Paramount's new 4K release of Karen Kusama's Aeon Flux. And there's a lot more coming up this week. Sign up for a 14-day free trial at shiny-things.ghost.io or find a link in the Semcast Blue Sky account. You like reading about movies? I like writing about them. Come check it out. What is it here? I have the numbers. Oh, it grossed 654 million globally on a budget of 140 million, which at the time was probably, it must have been the biggest hit Disney had had since Armageddon, which was another monster that cost a fortune, but brought in a fortune. And then this is right around that time that everyone is pivoting to blockbusters. And because DVD is killing theatrical screenings of anything that isn't massive and a giant audience experience, it would take another couple of years, but it was already happening. The mid-range film is disappearing, and that's driving this production force, it's driving production towards the bigger and better, because even if you spend $150 million, you'll probably make $500 million back, and that'll be enough to keep your studio going if you release 3 of those a year. And here we have what feels like an art movie that turns into a mass market blockbuster experience and then launches a franchise that no one saw coming.
Yeah. I mean, it's not like, obviously you say kind of off the back of Lord of the Rings. I mean, Lord of the Rings, obviously the films are incredible, but it was sort of more guaranteed, I think, to be a hit given the legacy of Tolkien's work and
exactly.
A lot of people have for those novels. I think the films were always going to be successful, even if they were terrible. It was just, I mean, it's great they made them so well and that they are such sort of timeless classics. But I think that they were obviously a lot less of a risk than sort of turning an old theme park ride into a $100 million movie.
Yeah, and finally turning Johnny Depp into the box office draw that he always seemed to think he was. Because his film work had been really, I mean, it was really varied. After 21 Jump Street, people didn't really seem to know where to put him because he insisted on chasing eccentric art projects. And then he made Edward Scissorhands and that exploded. And then he didn't want to do another one. So he sort of wheeled back into something else and made, like even when he made an action movie, it was something like Nick of Time, where it was a high concept, real time thing with him running around in a small series of locations and acting more than running. Like he always wanted to be an actor first. And so watching him abandon all of that, I mean, it's a performance. Jack Sparrow is a character that he is playing, but his lack of gravitas and manner and like just basically trading in depth for mannerism and just going for it and basically inhabiting this manic character who will do anything at any given moment instantly makes him the most interesting thing in the movie, of course, because you're watching him at the sides of the frame trying to pick it up and steal it. But it somehow also doesn't undermine the love story or the main relationships. That's the thing that I've continued to be fascinated by, because subsequently, obviously, everybody went all in on Jack Sparrow because he was in their minds, he was the reason the film was a hit. But it's really, he's one element. It would be like saying that that, Harrison Ford is the most important thing in Star Wars. And while it's arguably true, because Han Solo grounds the film in a way that no other character does by simply refusing to believe in all the Jedi stuff and being brought along on this larger story, Jack Sparrow threatens to eat the movie and is balanced out by the love story and the sort of the weird sheepish hero's journey that Elizabeth is given and that Keira Knightley plays so well, and Orlando Bloom kind of stepping up after, like, he must have been so tired after 3 Lord of the Rings pictures to just parachute into this thing and then be the hero who isn't the hero. Yeah. It's like, but their work is, I think, what makes Jack Sparrow tolerable, because he is their complication.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not kind of an overload of him. You have those other characters you can pivot to. You can cut to them when you need, which I think is, he's one of those sort of great characters that's in small doses is absolutely brilliant. But when you're sort of stuck with him for the whole 3 hours, if you like, or whatever, then it does kind of lose the magic. It loses the sort of the allure of him, I think, a little.
Yeah, and I don't want you to feel that I'm trying to take away your childhood adoration for the film, because it is a great deal of fun. I find that this one movie had the alchemy exactly right. Like the chemistry is spectacular in this film. And then we can even talk about the set pieces, which were at the time unprecedented. Because that's the other thing that Verbinski does is these incredibly complicated action scenes with crystal clear choreography and geography. We always know where we are. We can always follow the pieces in play. And somehow everyone looks like, I mean, they've trained, obviously, but everyone looks like they've been doing this all their lives. And it's so much fun.
He's a very underrated director, really. I mean, he pulls off, like, as you say, these incredible set pieces. And, I don't think he's really given his dues in terms of sort of his ability to do that compared to some other sort of, blockbuster directors that sort of are more revered. I think he should definitely be up there.
I agree. Yeah. Even the stuff that he pulls off in The Lone Ranger, which has sort of been forgotten, weirdly enough. And I suppose it's just because it has both Johnny Depp and Armie Hammer in it, who are no longer really, discussed on the same level for their acting anyway. But the final sequence, that extended chase, that is worthy of Buster Keaton. It's stunning to watch. And
I think it's one of the greatest action scenes that's ever been filmed. I mean, it was incredible. You just sit there and you watch it and you're never confused. As you say, the whole thing just flows by and it does enthrall you throughout the whole thing. I mean, it was an incredible piece of filmmaking.
Yeah. And even what he was doing in the Mexican with color temperature and tone and the comic tone, I saw that with an audience as well, and they were absolutely hostile to it. For whatever reason, they just didn't connect. I think they wanted Brad Pitt and Julia Roberts to just kiss for the whole thing.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And then separating them and having them go on separate storylines, which made perfect sense because it's a story about earning that romance. But the people I was sitting next to did not care for it. And there was just no sense of, like, when Gandolfini showed up, nobody liked it. It was very strange, but it kind of made me a Verbinski believer immediately, really, just because if he could pull that off and then do what he did with The Ring and with Pirates. I'm not a fan of A Cure for Wellness, but there is stuff in it. We did an episode on it a few months ago, and there is stuff in it, watching it again, that does rank with what he does better than anything else, like better than anyone else. He's a visual fetishist, I suppose. And
I mean, even Mousetrap has its great moments, and
Mousetrap is fun.
Yeah,
and that one is definitely a movie that is aimed at kids but designed for adults. Like if you were a parent and you have to take your child to mouse hunt, you will have a good time.
Yeah.
But with Pirates, it's all there. Like, it is. I don't know that it's his best movie, but it is the movie that is most his, I think, because he's not arguing with anybody, or all the arguments have already been had. And he is making the movie with the full faith and support of Disney.
Yeah, which I just can't see that ever kind of happening again. I think that is sort of a one and done phenomenon, really, especially in today's landscape. Unless there's a whole kind of change of the way studio films are made, I just can't see anything like Pirates of the Caribbean coming along again, really.
Yeah, well, and I don't even know that you could. I mean, you see what they've been doing with their other more recent theme park attempts, the adaptations. I would also argue that The Country Bears, had it been made and released in Japan, would be like in Japanese with English subtitles, would be hailed as a masterpiece, which just did not happen because they released it in America and no one knew what to do with it. But something like Jungle Cruise, which is pretty entertaining, but it's also absolutely indebted to what Verbinski did in Pirates of the Caribbean in a way that I don't think necessarily works for that property. Pirates of the Caribbean, you have license to be silly and incorporate all the big, tales of sailing off the edge of the earth and monsters and ghosts and curses. And Jungle Cruise, there isn't even that to go with. It's just like, here's a scene where we get attacked by the monster that you saw, the big alligator from the ride, and now it's a joke, but then again it'll be real, and now we have all this other stuff, and oh yeah, he's immortal too. It piles on too much because now everything has to be made like Pirates of the Caribbean, like the movie, not the ride. We can no longer see things as separate entities. They all have to conform to some imagined expectation of what you get now.
Yeah, that is interesting. I think this sort of effect it had on sort of the broader culture of film, I don't think is really spoken about enough. Because like you say, like Jungle Cruise, when did that come out? That was a few years ago. And obviously it's so heavily influenced by Pirates of the Caribbean, all those years later, but, after 2003. So it is. Yeah, it's certainly interesting. I mean that one, it's essentially just like a goofy African Queen kind of ripoff, which they just sort of thrown Pirates of the Caribbean and African Queen together and sort of hoped it would stick, which obviously, it didn't really do, I don't think. But yeah, sort of the mark on culture that film had is pretty remarkable.
Yeah, it's quite striking, and it is weird that 22 years later, everyone's just sort of agreed to move beyond it, or at least pretend that it didn't have the impact that it had for that tiny moment, which is weird because, yeah, you're erasing a substantial, I don't know if it was a landmark accomplishment in fantasy cinema, but to have the impact that it had and spawn the franchise that it did, which then sputters out without Verbinski at the helm, I think there's a perfect little narrative there anyway that's easy for everyone to connect to. But it is definitely a moment in time. And also, this is going to sound awful, but the post 9/11 blockbuster, for most of the early 2000s, that meant serious. And this wasn't. This was absolutely an alternative to that. It was a fun, escapist epic that was also, beautifully made and inarguably technically innovative. But other than a couple of shots at the East Indian Tea Company that came in the sequels, there's nothing that you need to think about in the real world. There are no real world balances other than, oh, that looks like Keith Richards. You can just lose yourself in it for 2.5 hours. And in 2003, when things were actively going to hell, yeah, it was a bomb. It was a BALM. I mean, it was a pleasure to sink into something like that.
Yeah, no, that is an interesting way of looking at it, because obviously I didn't really, as a kid, 4-year-old kid, I had no real concept of 9/11. I mean, obviously I was alive when it happened, but I was about a year old, so I didn't view it in that same capacity. But obviously, from like a childhood perspective as well, it was pure escapism in that sense as well. You immerse yourself in the world of these sort of 18th century seafarers for 2 hours, and it is enthralling. But obviously, viewing it as you were at sort of an older age and experiencing it in that kind of post 9/11 setting is also, very interesting as well.
Yeah. I mean, it was a very different time and a very weird time, but this was an opportunity to not think about any of that. And I think that is part of the appeal, that something is so completely weightless and silly could just dominate in this little window of the summer of 2003 and just launch its own silly thing and be whatever it wanted to be. Because when you're not anchored, when you're not anchored to reality in any way, there are no rules and you can do whatever you want. And to do what it did and then to pivot into something as ambitious as it became in the second and third films, as they just had to keep building new annexes onto the original story and pull in some of the biggest stars in the world for tiny little cameos, ultimately in the larger spirit and in the larger sense of the series. But to have Chow Yun Fat in a pirate movie made by an American studio. Yes, I mean it's great marketing for the Asian market, which was already becoming a thing, and it would appeal to, another 600 million people to watch the movie that they might not otherwise have seen. And Michelle Yeoh's in there too. It's just wall to wall interesting when it could have just settled for the same again. So I admire the need to, I admire the drive to expand and go bigger, even though it was obviously the only thing that anyone could have done at that point. They did it well.
Yeah, and I mean, Bill Nye as Davy Jones was just fantastic with that squid.
I know. I always forget it's him. I always forget it's him under there. It couldn't be anyone else. It's absolutely his delivery, but it's he so fully inhabits that role that I never think about it.
He does, and the CGI, honestly, it looks so much better than kind of the CGI that comes out today. It's flawless. You can watch it now, almost 20 years later, and it still really, stands up, really stands the test of time.
Yeah, I wonder if that's because it's output to film, and that's what we're seeing. Like the extra step of bringing it to 24 frames on celluloid just to release it in theaters makes something feel weightier. I always feel like, digital can be a little light.
Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it. I'd never thought about it like that before. But yeah, obviously the switch to everything looking more fake is the switch from film into digital as well. So yeah, I think there probably is something to that.
I wonder, it's something I've wanted to figure out for years, but I've never quite, because you end up seeing most things on video anyway. Now, digitally, there's no way to prove the thesis short of watching things on 35 millimeter originals, and that's almost impossible to do. But I will say that, even just because this is the 50th anniversary of Jaws, I've had a occasion to spend a lot more time with Jaws than I usually would, which is a lot anyway. But to spend time watching the way the effects were sort of retrofitted to what was available. The shark doesn't move ever, even when the mouth opens, but that's about it. When it's swimming, the fins don't move. The thing's not animated in the way that it was supposed to be, but also in the way that a digital creature would be. And it still works because the actors are right there with it, believing it. And I think that's kind of the thing that's missing in a lot of the digital work, where even, Bill Nye has a bunch of dots on his face, but he's there for them to talk to and for the eye lines to match. And he's not being substituted by a digital character after the fact. There is a sense of physical presence that everybody's responding to. The same with the Kraken. Ultimately, there's one scene, I think, where they built the head just so it would be visible to the actors off in the distance. And that's the most believable shot.
Yeah, and I like the way it's kind of all based on actual mythology as well, that, sailors would have believed in that era and stuff. I think that adds another layer to it that makes it kind of feel less fake in a way as well, because it's like you can Google these things and they are rooted in some sort of mythology, every kind of all the supernatural elements of it, which, obviously it's not just they've just concocted some sort of, supernatural being in a workshop or whatever. It is sort of rooted in some, well, not reality, but yeah, superstition.
It is that exactly. I mean, it is simply, what if the tall tales were real? And what would that have looked like? And then you also get this quiet sense that, and it's really felt, I think, towards the end of the third film, that this world is dying. Like things are going away. And it's the last gasp of the supernatural, although the Flying Dutchman kind of cocks that up a bit, since it's probably still out there somewhere.
Yeah. But no, I know what you mean. It was quite nice how they kind of rounded all that off, and it sort of, at the end of that film, essentially does kind of enter the sort of real world in a sense. All the mythology does kind of die away.
Yeah. Elizabeth Swann has to go home and write novels or something. It's not that she deserves a full backstory, because these are two-dimensional characters. Ultimately, they're archetypes and that's okay, that they're nothing more than the lovers or the pirate or the sailor or what have you. But yeah, it feels like Knightley, she does, she has that flicker, that cameo appearance much, much later in the series. And she's like, oh, but I want to know what she was doing. If you're going to show me that she's around, where's she been? What kind of a life has she had? And then, of course, you end up with Titanic. So you don't want that either. Just a pan past a bunch of sketches of what she would have been doing.
It is quite interesting how they just kind of, it would have been quite nice to have known what she was up to, I guess. They could have done that as a spin-off film instead of some of the other ones they did.
God, I've come around to arguing for prequels. I'm very sorry. we were talking about texture and reality and shooting on real locations when possible. And I think the first film at least, is a testament to that, because yeah, they need to be on the water. You need to see the islands and the docks and the sense that people are going from one place to another and have the time stuck together on the ship to form the kind of relationships that they do. But this is the bit where I pivot and say that, you know, you've just made a film where the water is arguably the most important thing, right? Like, it is the challenge, it's the adversary. There are other antagonists within the narrative, but you are ultimately telling the story of a woman and the channel, a woman and the sea. And I was trying to figure out, when you pick Pirates, if there was a direct link in terms of the storytelling or your approach. I couldn't really find an aesthetic one, but certainly the practicality of it seems to be one of the connections.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely inspiration there. I mean, obviously, it's quite subtle and sort of probably I'll only notice it just because obviously they're such disparate movies. You know, one sort of an adventure film of all supernatural creatures and octopus face people and stuff, and the other one, you know, is very grounded in reality of a real woman who went out and swam the English Channel. But no, I mean, you spoke about Jaws earlier as well, and that was another one that was a big inspiration behind it. Obviously, again, it's a very different film, but they all kind of have this theme of doing things for real and sort of putting the care into it and shooting it out at sea, which you know, obviously we did with this film. We didn't fake any of it. We were 2 miles out into the English Channel. There were no water tanks, no green screens. There wasn't even any body doubles. Kirsten Callahan, who plays Mercedes Lights in the film, she did all her own swimming without a stunt double. Sort of trained for 3 or 4 months before we started filming. So in that sense, I think there is kind of a bit of a through line with those different films, you know, in that they really did kind of inspire the craft, I would say, essentially, is sort of what they led to with Vindication Swim.
And the grounding of having someone in the water all the time to shoot those scenes has to influence the performance too. I mean, there are things that, you know, body aches and chills that you can act it, but really experiencing it is going to change the way you relate to that scene.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, everything is real. Because like Kirsten sort of spoke a lot when we were making the film about how sort of went beyond acting, because she was just kind of experiencing what was in the script for real. You know, she wasn't having to kind of fake any kind of performance. She was just reacting to the environment around her. You know, we had the guys next to her in the wooden boat and the waves would be hitting her in the face. She was trying to deliver a line. So naturally you would just be coughing and spluttering and you know, kind of have those chills. Sometimes she was in the water for sort of 4 hours at a time. So it was a feat of endurance really to make the film. And I think it does kind of reflect in those swimming scenes, you know, with her performance. And even with the guys in the boat, you know, that they were getting uncomfortable. They were sat on that boat, for the wooden boat, for hours, kind of rocking around. So you kind of, I think you kind of feel that in their performances.
How do you direct something like that? Or do you just simply create the circumstance and let it happen?
A lot of it out at sea, was kind of creating the circumstance. It was almost like documentary filmmaking, really. You know, we just prepped a lot and made sure everything was kind of real for them out there. So that, you know, they didn't really come back onto the support boat once we'd gone out there. They kind of stayed in their wooden boat, and likewise, Kirsten kind of stayed in the water. So I just had to be kind of everywhere, you know, zipping around in different boats, then jumping in the water and making sure I kind of get all the shots, because I DP'd it as well. So I was kind of, you know, running around really just making sure that I kind of covered everything, and that, yeah, I was sort of reacting as well to the natural world and the waves, and kind of in a sense the sea dictated the story really. You know, sometimes we'd go out there and we'd get 1 or 2 shots in the can, have to abandon it just because it got too dangerous, and we, you know, we'd come back in. And I'd say it was probably about 30 times, maybe more, that we went out in the end over sort of a 3-year period. So it was an arduous shoot for sure.
Yeah, and I'm assuming you did not have the same budgetary level as a giant Disney theme park production.
No, absolutely not. No, you could knock a few zeros off, or quite a few zeros actually. But yeah, no, I mean, we I think that was a help in a sense, because obviously, you know, it was a 3-year production we're out there for. So had it been, you know, such a big outfit like one of those kind of Disney films, the amount of entourage you're bringing with you every day and all those salaries you have to pay and everything, I just don't think it would have been tenable to have dragged that out over 3 years. You know, you would have had to have kind of shot it all or moved onto a tank, and that would have been cheaper, but we couldn't afford a tank. You know, that was why we were out there, partly why we were out there in the sea anyway.
We've already sort of covered the usual closing question, which is if there's anything that you've borrowed or lifted from the film you've cited. But I wanted to put it in a different direction and just ask the obvious question. If you were given a shot at a Pirates sequel, if you were asked to pitch, would you be interested, and where would you want to take the story?
Yeah, I'd certainly be interested. I swear, in terms of where I would take it, I mean, it's a tricky question given kind of the way that the subsequent films have panned out. But I think obviously it would have to pivot back to the first one. I think, I think going on and kind of going for bigger and better every single time has obviously not, it hasn't worked after that third film. I think they went as big as you could possibly go with that, really. So I think kind of a scaled back approach that sort of tied more into kind of the history and the reality of kind of seafaring, not in the sense that it would become kind of a drama, but tying back into that mythology, which I think a lot of the subsequent films kind of lost. They had the mermaids and stuff, which were cool, but in terms of sort of what they were seeking, I think it lost that kind of mystery and that sort of seafaring quality that the first couple of films really kind of went hard on. I think that was what made them great. They were adventures. They weren't really action. They had action in them, but ultimately they were adventure movies.
I mean, there must be something that hasn't been tried yet. I've always just wondered what else could be done, and would you be even interested in, or would anyone be interested in seeing Jack Sparrow again? Because I think the fifth one sort of emptied the tank on where that character could go and what he can do. If you don't use him, how do you replace him? How do you fill that void?
I don't think there is a way of filling that void, really. I think the franchise, as much as we kind of discussed how it isn't all about him, essentially it is all about him when it comes time to buy the ticket and go and see the movie, So I just think, I think without him, there is no Pirates, that would be it.
I wonder. Adam Driver. I just picture Adam Driver in a bunch of scarves, immediately throwing them into the ocean and having his own adventure.
Adam Driver would be quite interesting. Yeah, certainly I think he certainly suit the pirate look. Yeah,
something about his jaw.
Yeah, he has a characterful face, which I think a lot of leading men don't have these days, and that's what I think is so interesting about Adam Driver. Anyone with an interesting face is always great. I mean, working with John in Vindication Swim, you could stare at that guy all day. He has a great face to look at, and it really kind of lends itself to the world. I think when you have those people with the kind of cool, rugged faces.
Yeah, I mean, he's somebody who clearly has lived, right? He hasn't spent his entire life on sound stages.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There's no kind of polish or shine. You can see all the tales of the history of the character just through kind of the rugged lines in his face.
Mm-hmm. And one scarf, max. And you have to have restrictions.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
My thanks to Elliott Hasler, whose second feature, Vindication Swim, is in U.S. theaters this Friday, October 17th, and coming soon to Canadian screens. Thanks also to Michael Krause. He knows what he did. You can find Elliott on Instagram at Elliott Hasler, all one word, and you can find Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl, on 4K, Blu-ray, and DVD from Walt Disney Home Entertainment. It's also streaming on Disney Plus and available to rent or buy on various VOD services across North America. You can find me on Blue Sky at Norm Wilner, and you can find this podcast there at Semcast, S-E-M-Cast, and on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. The first year of the show is still available for just $20 at payhip.com/Semcast. That's the first 52 episodes of Someone Else's Movie, 41 of which aren't currently available anywhere else. And check out my newsletter, Shiny Things, at shiny-things.ghost.io. I think you'll enjoy it. Our theme song is by The Last Year. If you like it, or the show in general, please say so. Leave a review wherever you've been listening. Every little bit helps, it truly does. And check out the other shows on the Frequency Podcast Network while you're doing that. Stay safe, watch movies, get all the boosters you can. I'll see you next week.